My favorite commercial at the moment is the Capital One commercial that has Charles Barkley in it. If you've seen that one, Charles Barkley is a retired NBA basketball player. He's a huge guy, and he is on a basketball court in like a city park with a bunch of children, and the children are choosing teams for their basketball team. And the first little girl comes up and says, "I'll take Barkley." And Charles gets really excited. He jumps up and down and he says, "I told you she'd pick me." And that's kind of the image that I get in my mind when I hear the readings for this weekend, because I think all of us have been in that situation one time or another, hoping that we would be picked, that we would be chosen, that we would be on the inside. Whether that be being chosen for a job, for a promotion, for a position that we've maybe running for, an elected position, that somehow we're wanting to be part of something bigger than ourselves. The first reading today is from the book of Leviticus. And Leviticus is a really difficult book to discern. It's long and it's heavy and it's lots of laws and rules and regulations for the Jewish people at the time. And it talks about leprosy. In fact, both the first reading and the gospel talk about leprosy. Now, just to be clear, at the time of Jesus, a leper would not have been someone like we think about today of having Hansen's disease. Leprosy was a more general term for if there was anything wrong with your skin. So you might have had leprosy, but you might just have a lesion or a cut or a scab or something that wasn't perfect, and so people would sort of wonder about you, and they would want to leave you out. And that's what Leviticus talks about. It says that if somebody has the appearance of leprosy, that he shall dwell apart, making his abode outside the camp. And it made me think a little bit about who in our world today gets left outside the camp. You know, Charles Barkley might have had that fear of being left outside the camp because he's older and he's retired and maybe considers himself washed up. But other members of our society, whether that be the sick or the elderly or too young or not having proper social status, you know, somebody that feels left out from the rest of the community. And this theme then continues to emerge in Mark's gospel, because in Mark's gospel we see a leper approach Jesus, and Jesus, it says, reaches out and touches him, which was unheard of at the time. You don't dare touch a leper. He reaches out and touches the man, and he heals him. But that's not all. He tells the man, "Don't tell anybody about this." Well, it's kind of like when you see a sign that says, "Wet paint, do not touch." Don't you just really want to touch it? So as soon as the guy has been told, "Don't tell anybody," he goes out and tells everybody. And the problem is that Jesus then becomes so famous and so popular that everybody wants to be around him. And because everybody wants to try to find him, it says that Jesus has to dwell apart. It says that he remained outside in deserted places. Which is kind of interesting, because in the first reading, the thing that keeps people from being part of the community, that makes them be isolated from everybody else, is that they're down and out and they're sick and they're outcasts. But what keeps Jesus from being with everybody else is that he's too popular, that everybody knows who he is and everybody's seeking after him. And it reminded me of some quotes that I read by some famous stars, movie stars, performers. For example, Jennifer Lawrence once said, "I'm lonely every Saturday night. I feel like I need to meet a guy, with all due respect, who has been living in Baghdad for 5 years and has no idea who I am." George Clooney recently said, "The big house on a hill is isolating. There are restrictions to this kind of fame. I haven't walked in Central Park for 15 years. And Justin Bieber said, "I feel isolated. You're in a hotel room, there's fans all around, and it gets intense. But I can't go anywhere or do anything alone. I would not wish this on anyone." Now, the point here isn't necessarily to evoke sympathy for those who are rich and wealthy, though it probably could, but more deeply, it helps us to recognize that until we've walked in somebody else's shoes, we don't know what they're going through. We don't know what kind of isolation people are feeling from community. Maybe the person sitting in front of or behind you or next to you, or maybe even you today, feeling some sense of isolation, feeling like you have to remain outside in deserted places or outside the camp. So the point is that there are a lot of people who feel that way, and I think that this is where the Catholic Church can make a big difference, and does make a big difference. If you look in the Catechism of the Church, it talks about our need to extend hospitality as Christians. Hospitality is a big word. The Catholic Church has always taught that spirit. So if we go all the way back in the Bible, even to the book of Genesis, chapter 18, there's a story of Abraham that is visited by 3 unknown men that talk to him. And when they come into his camp, Abraham immediately cooks them food. He puts them up for the night. He sees them off on their way, and he doesn't know who they are. It doesn't dawn on him until later in the chapter that this actually is God himself. And we don't find out until chapter 19 that the 2 other men with him were both angels. He had no idea. Because you see, Abraham wasn't looking for the perfect person or somebody that would be to his advantage to offer hospitality to. The first person that came in the door, he immediately went into hospitality mode and started serving them. So we see in Hebrews chapter 13, one of my favorite quotes, perhaps you've heard before, it says, "Do not neglect hospitality, for through it some have unknowingly entertained angels." How about that? The person that you extend hospitality to, the person that you extend a hand to and welcome them and greet them and say hello and introduce yourself, that may very well be an angel and you don't even know it. And we see this great example in the New Testament when Martha and Mary, sisters, entertain Jesus. They bring them to their house and they feed him and they put him up, them together with their brother Lazarus, the same Lazarus that Jesus raised from the dead. And the 3 of them extend this hospitality to Christ, kind of giving us the model of what it means to reach out to other people. In fact, it's so profound that Pope Francis, you may have seen this in the news just a couple of weeks ago, he changed the feast of St. Martha beginning this year in July. It will from now on be known as the feast of St. Martha, St. Mary, and St. Lazarus, all 3 of them on the same day. Because what we're trying to do is to sort of talk about the importance of family and the importance of reaching out with hospitality, not only to our Lord Jesus, but to one another, because they serve as a model for that. When I heard about that, I was reminded of a situation I was in a couple of years ago when I went to Mass at an Eastern Rite church. So if you're not familiar with that, the Catholic Church has the Eastern Rite, which is sort of a different way of praying the Mass, but every bit as much of a Catholic as we are. But I go to an Eastern Rite Mass every once in a while for the variety. And I was in a small Eastern Rite church. There were probably less than 100 of us at Mass. And the priest was praying the prayers of the faithful, the intercessions, and he was chanting them. And he's chanting to the congregation, and he says, "For Pope Francis, let us pray to the Lord." And then he says, "For the visitor in our midst, that the Spirit will be with him, and he will come and visit us again." And I looked around and I thought, "They're talking about me." You know, it was a very awkward situation, but only awkward for a quick moment. Actually, for a minute, I thought to myself, how cool is that? I mean, of all the people that are sitting in the church right now, he knows there's one that doesn't look like the others. He recognizes me, and impromptu, he throws in a prayer for me. And when Mass was over, people came up to me and introduced themselves. "So good to have you here. Who are you? Where are you from? Have coffee with us." I don't drink coffee. But at any rate, we had a nice conversation after Mass, and I got to meet a whole bunch of people. That's hospitality. That's people reaching out to you, recognizing that they want you to be part of their community, to bring you in. And it kind of made me think about St. Thoams and how we do that with one another. If we're kind of keeping an eye out of who's new to the parish and who isn't, who hasn't been here for the last couple of weeks, and reaching out to them. And in a broader sense, not only within our own parish, but what about within our classes, within our jobs, within our families? Who should we be reaching out to and pulling back in that might feel right now like they're being left outside the camp for whatever reason? There's another subtle thing that's going on in these readings today that runs parallel to this. And in Leviticus, it talks about that once a person has been healed, they have to present themselves to the priest to be let back in. Notice that that's what happens in the gospel today. Jesus could have talked to this leper, touched him, and said, okay, you're healed, go forth, and then just walked away. But that's not what he does. He heals the leper, and then he tells him, go show yourself to the priest. That will be a sign that you're healed. Why would he go show himself to the priest? So the priest will let him back inside the camp and let him be part of the community again. See, that's the whole point. Jesus was not just about curing a guy and getting rid of his leprosy. He was about healing him by bringing him back into the community where he could be with his friends and his relatives and his neighbors. This is all about hospitality and building community. And that's what we're called to do as Christians. This afternoon at the 5 o'clock Mass, we will have the rite of election, or the rite of sending for the rite of election. So it is a simple rite that we do for those who are in the RCIA process. We have 8 people this year, 6 being brought into full communion and 2 others being baptized. And they will present themselves in front of the altar today, and we will send them forth to the cathedral next weekend to be for this rite of election with Bishop Thomas. And that's exactly what this is about, is also allowing them to recognize how we call them into the community, to be part of St. Thoams, to be part of the Catholic Church in something bigger than they're currently being able to feel. The church should be a community where we share one another's lives, and probably more importantly, we share the Eucharist here every Sunday as we gather together. And so let us remember in the coming days to greet others with that hospitality that Jesus has shown, that hospitality that welcomes people into the community, reaching out, introducing ourselves, saying hello at church and beyond, so that those around us will respond like Charles Barkley did and say, I told you they'd pick me.